Good morning and welcome to Bay Street Jewelers. We're actually going to start a new segment for our listening audience out there. We're actually going to do jewelry repairs. We're going to show you how various techniques are actually done so that we have so many clients that end up coming in and say, how do you size a ring? How do you retip prongs? How do you restring pearls? How do you repair watches? So we're going to take one class per week and we're going to go into the rudimentaries of doing these repairs itself. Today's lesson is actually going to be studied on sizing a ring. And we're actually sizing the ring up, not down. Sizing it down is actually a little bit easier for the majority of the rings, but today's is going to be sizing it up, which is a little bit harder. What we actually do in this particular case, we have a diamond solitaire. The very first thing that we do is we inspect it under the microscope and we make sure that there's not other issues with the ring itself before we size it. Then we put it on what they call a mandrel and we look at it and we decide what the true size is now and where it's actually going. Once we have done that, we can actually turn the ring around so that the diamond in this particular case is at the very top of the piece and the back shank is where we're actually going to cut. So what I'll do is I'll get my flex shaft just like this and we'll cut the reverse side of the ring itself, and at that point I use a different mandrel for this portion. We'll pull the ring apart until we get to the desired size as to what we're looking for. That's how much one size actually is on this particular repair. Once we have determined that actual size, we're going to go back just a little bit and I'm going to score the insides of the grooves of where I'm actually going to be placing the splice at. So I'll go in and I'll put little tiny grooves into the work. That just helps to hold my new piece that I'm working with. Now, what you actually see in front of you here are different sizing bars that we use. In this particular job for the concept of the filming, I went ahead and pre-cut one knowing that I was just adding one size. But normally I would have used a long bar of white gold in this particular case and cut my different splice as to the length that I need. Once we have determined that we just need that one size, what we'll do is we'll put that little splice into place or into the gap of the ring itself so that you're actually able to see that it fills the whole gap of the ring on both sides. Once we have done that, we'll put the ring into a grip or a third hand in this particular case. Then I'm going to end up getting what they call solder. This is little tiny pieces of 14 karat chip solder, and I'll get about 2 pieces since this is not that big of an item, and I'll put 2 pieces in it. I've got a little syringe of what they call flux, and I'll put just a tiny bit of that flux on each one of my little pieces that I'm working with. And then this is the reason I got into the jewelry business. I get to play with fire. So we start our fire up, and every ring has a different required temperature or heat, and over the years you get familiar as to which heat's going to end up working the best with the project that you're working on. Once you've gotten your heat, you get a pick like this. You go in and you slowly meet your, just trying to splash it around just a little bit. And once I have done that, I have got it on my pick, and you can see it just sitting on the edge of the pick itself. I'm going to go in and actually heat my work, just nice and easy. Just heat my work, and you'll see that the actual solder flowed into the gap of the piece itself. Once we have done that, I will inspect it, just look at it, make sure that it flowed evenly and correctly. Now I moved my ring so that the new splice is still sitting on the top of it. I'm going to go back and do the same exact Okay. I've got my newest little piece of solder on it. I'm going to go back and heat again that same little area, pulling the flame back and forth until I actually have got it to flow one more time. We're going to let that actually sit and let it cool on its own because it is very, very hot to the touch right now. The repair on this particular one ended up coming up to about 1250 degrees for that work. Being that it was a diamond, that's not an issue whatsoever because a diamond cannot be affected heat-wise unless you get up to about 5,000 Fahrenheit. Had this been an emerald, a ruby, sapphire, those are a little bit more protected. The emerald's not, but the rubies and the sapphires are. But had it been a more heat-sensitive stone like the emerald, amethyst, blue topaz, we would actually used a cool jewel that I end up having. It's a solution. In the olden days, when I first got into the business, it was actually made out of asbestos. Now it is not. It's a little bit more lab created, but we actually submerged the ring in this, except for the work that I'm getting ready to do. And then we actually solder the piece in the back without fear of hurting the stones on the top. So now that this is actually cooled enough to touch, I can go back on my mandrel. I can pull it down on the mandrel to a little bit of a degree just to make sure that it was round. What I'm going to do, because the solder flowed to the inside of the ring also, is we're going to use like a little drum, just like this. And I'm going to go in and actually just clean out my inside just a little bit, not overly, just enough to kill some of the solder marks that I end up putting into the inside. Just to clean it out so that the inside is pretty much clear of all the debris of the solder and the piece that I put into it. Now we can pull it back onto the mandrel. I pull it very, very tight to the mandrel itself. I know that you always have a fear of somebody hitting your ring with a hammer, but in this particular case it's actually good. I'm just beating a little bit of that solder mark into the ring, not stretching the rest of the ring out or anything of that nature, but just where my work actually was. Once we have done that, we need to start cleaning up the work that we actually have. So I'll get a metal file and I'll just clean up the outside of the work that I had, both sides. Just enough to cut the edge, but not to thin out the ring. As you can tell, none of my grooves actually touched for my filing, touched the rest of the ring. It's a common problem in the jewelry industry. Is too many people overfile a ring and they'll start breaking down the width of the outside of the ring. You don't want to do that. This has got to be very, very simple. You just want to end up getting enough to do what you're working on. So now I use different grit sandpapers and I just blend it in to the rest of the ring as so. Now if I was working with platinum, I would actually use about 4 different sandpaper grits. You want to start out a little bit heavier, then you want to end up going to the finer. Once we have gotten the majority of that off of it, I actually do want to go across this top. Just to blend in the top, just a little bit. I'm going to change on my flex shaft where I had that big drum which had a little bit coarser sandpaper to it. I'm actually going to put a very, very super fine silicone wheel on. That silicone wheel allows me to go across the top and allows me to blend in my work just a little bit better. Then I'm going to go to the inside of the ring and blend in the soldering that we ended up having there. You can pretty much see from the work that I've already done that the majority of it is very clean. It's very composed to the rest of the ring itself. There's a couple little hiccups to it, but I'm going to take care of those once I take it to the polishing wheels and brighten and finish and put my final finishes on it. I can do that on the wheel and then put it into the cleaner to end up removing all the little metal filings and the finish cleaning up the ring. It's very important that when you add heat to a piece like this, that you want to end up cleaning the piece as best possible stone-wise before you start the work, because the heat that I did add to this, as I said, 1250 to 1300 degrees, actually some of that heat does make it up to the diamond itself, and if you've got any debris on the back of it, you'll end up baking that to the back of the stone, and it's almost impossible to get it off without removing the stone. So in this particular case, I always make sure that I clean it. Once I have polished this piece up on the big polishing wheels, dropped it into the cleaner to finish it up, this particular ring is actually white gold. So at that point in time, I'm going to finish it by dipping it in what they call rhodium, which is kind of like a platinum. It's part of the precious metals grouping of the platinum group, and it flash coats it. It gives it a higher residual white shine versus 14 karat white gold, because white gold derives itself from yellow gold. It's just the nickel and copper and some zinc that they add to it that changes the color to a warm white color. But we'll make it a very, very high white color, just like you would end up seeing if you were purchasing the ring for the first time in the engagement counter. That's going to conclude this lesson on this. I'm not going to show the finished product because it's going to take me about 4 or 5 minutes to finish the rest of the product. But if you ever have any concerns as to, please ask us as to any repair and how it's actually done. I'm more than happy to help. If there is a segment that you would like to be shown and in the future, please Facebook us, let us know, and we'll be more than happy to comply with that in the future. Thank you for listening in on our first session.